Today we are making a super easy yet delicious caramel apple pie. We are starting off with making the crust. You are going to add 2.5 cups of flour in a stand mixing bowl. You can hand mix, you can use a food processor, but I find that just the whisk attachment on my KitchenAid works the best. I also stirred in 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Then, just using a cheese shredder, I shredded 2 sticks or 1 cup of salted butter. You can use unsalted if you want, but I like salted butter. You're going to combine this until it becomes small and crumbly. You can check the consistency by picking some up and squeezing it, and if it stays together and doesn't just fall apart, you have the perfect consistency. In a small bowl, I am going to be combining 8 tablespoons of water, ice water, make sure it's cold, with 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. You're going to stir that together, then pour half of it into your flour mixture, turn it on, let it whisk for about 30 seconds to a minute, and then add the second half. Your mixture will become thicker, the clumps will become wetter looking, and you should be able to squeeze your dough together and have it stay together. If you find that your dough is still a little bit dry and it's kind of hard to keep it together, you can slowly add 1 tablespoon of water at a time until you can reach the consistency that if you squeeze it together to make a disc, it won't just fall apart. Now you want to make sure that your dough isn't wet, that it's not sticky, it's not sticking to your hands, because then you added too much water. So try to stick to the tablespoon ratio and then slowly add in a tablespoon as needed. I just place all of the dough on the counter, try to get all of the crumbs and the pieces together, cut it in half, and shape it into 2 discs. These are going to be the top and the bottom part of the crust. You can see me trying to squish the tops, the bottoms, and the sides. I don't like to have too many cracks in mine. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, but I have found that when I am trying to roll out the dough, any of the cracks, especially on the edges, will result in cracks when I'm rolling the dough. So I try to have it semi-smooth. It doesn't have to be perfect by any means, but enough to where the crust won't break apart as I'm rolling it out. I just place each disc in saran wrap and place it in the fridge for at least 30 minutes. Having the dough in the fridge for at least 30 minutes will help to re-solidify the butter. It will help it to be able to be easily rolled out, and it will help to create a nice crispy crust. This is completely optional, but I like to sprinkle a little bit of flour on the top and bottom of my discs or on the saran wrap. It just helps that when you're unwrapping it, your dough doesn't get stuck to the saran wrap and it just easily comes off. I typically roll my dough out roughly 30 minutes after it's been in the fridge. I did leave this dough in the fridge overnight, so it was a little bit harder for me to press the dough. I had the second disc actually out on the counter the same time that I was rolling this dough, and so it was a lot softer and a lot easier to work with. So if you are going to leave your dough overnight, I just highly suggest leaving it out on the counter for at least 3 to 5 minutes just to soften the dough and make it easier to roll. Because my dough was harder than normal, I didn't lay flour out on the counter, but I absolutely should have. So don't forget to sprinkle flour on your counter before you start to roll your dough. I am using the stick of butter that I will melt for the filling, but before I melt it, I am just running it over the pie pan to ensure that the crust will not get stuck to the bottom or the sides. You can sprinkle a little bit of flour over top of the butter too. That is completely optional, but I highly recommend adding the butter on top first. I am just unrolling my dough and then positioning it better in the pie pan. Your dough should be fairly firm and easy to work with, so if it doesn't align perfectly, it should be no big deal. Then I am just pinching down the edges into the shape of my pie pan. You want to just make sure that you don't have any edges that are going to hang over too much or have too much pie dough on one side and not enough on the other side. Then I am just cutting and slicing apples. I wanted these apples to be fairly thin. If the apple slice was decently thin, I left it, but any of the ones that were a little bit bigger, I decided to cut in half. These are apples that somehow we moved here and we didn't even know that we were going to have all this fruit, but we have 7 organic apple trees. They are beautiful, so I am taking full advantage of these beautiful apples that someone else planted, but we have been blessed with. The size of apples that you use will determine on how many apples you need. I used, I believe, 5 apples. They were fairly large. I have made this pie before with small apples that I used 10 of. My favorite part about this recipe is you don't have to peel the apples. I am all about an apple dessert that I do not have to peel. I do not like to peel, so that is why this is one of my favorite recipes. Not only is it delicious, but it's very easy to be able to just slice up the apples, fill up your pan, and you are good to go. I'm not sure if you can tell, but this dough that has been setting out for about 10 minutes is so much easier to roll out. It still is firm enough that you can move it, it won't fall apart, it doesn't stick to your fingers, but it is so much easier to roll. Then I'm just taking a pizza cutter and I am going to cut 8 slices. I have also made this pie where I've cut 10. Depending on how you rolled out your pie crust, you can just determine the number based off that. Now we are going to be making our lattice for our pie. It is a lot easier than it looks. I am just taking strips that I feel would be the most appropriate for the size. So the strips towards the end will be for the end of the pie. The longer strips will be for the middle. You're going to have 4 strips going one way and 4 strips going the other. Again, if you rolled out your dough thinner and you were able to get 10 strips instead of 8, you will do 5 and 5. Place the 4 strips semi-evenly or as evenly as you can over top of the pie, and you are going to go every other. So whether you have 4, whether you have 5, you're going to go every other and lay a strip going the opposite direction. It's going to be a lot easier for you to just watch than to try to have me explain, but the key really is if your strip was on top, the next go around is going to be on the bottom and you're going to alternate every other. So hopefully you are watching and it makes a lot more sense than me trying to explain. It's okay if your strips hang over, if they're too long, we will adjust it. You can always cut them off. You will see that I end up using pieces to curve around the edges, make the edges more full, or in some areas where my bottom crust was a little bit thinner, I will take the excess pieces and put it there. I won't lie, doing the edges of the crust, I am not the best at. I know that you can use your finger, which is what I am doing here, and take your other 2 fingers and kind of pinch around your pointer finger that's bent. It's kind of hard to explain, but hopefully you saw what I was doing. If it doesn't look perfect, that's okay, as long as it tastes great. In a medium saucepan, I am just adding that stick of butter that we used initially to rub all over our pie pan so that our crust didn't stick. I'm also adding brown sugar, a little bit of water, cinnamon, and salt, and then I'm just going to be whisking that up until it boils. If you want the full recipe, I will have it linked down below. I have a designated blog post for this at westmanacademyhomeschool.com. You're going to whisk this until it begins to boil. You'll have it boil for about 3 minutes. It will become very bubbly and a deep, rich brown color. You want to make sure that your pie is ready to go before this, that your lattice is set, and that you can take this pan directly over to your pie and pour it on. If you turn off the stove and then do your pie, it will harden. I have had that happen before, and if you try and reheat it, it just won't be the same. So make sure your pie is ready to go. Pour that beautiful caramel sauce all over. Don't forget the edges, and then you are ready to bake. You are going to bake this initially at 425 degrees for 15 minutes. Then go ahead and turn the heat down to 350 degrees and bake it for an additional 35 minutes. This pie recipe is actually inspired by 2 of Chef John's recipes that I kind of made my own and threw together. So thank you so much for watching. I did not get footage somehow of my pie afterwards. I was so focused on getting beautiful pictures. It tasted great. It lasted 1 day. My family loved it, and so will yours. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Kelsey, and I make videos on homemaking, homeschool, and creating a wholesome home.